Um, yeah, so I'll probably just mention this again later, but I'm just going to continue with the second element. And the second element is, or he says, that between the knuckles, sometimes this is not straight. So, in other words, between um, the knuckles protrude, especially when the hand is in movement. And generally speaking, and depending of the hand, obviously, this caves in a little bit. So even though it may not look like this on my hand, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to create a very Angelina Jolie-esque hand. I just finished watching Maria yesterday, and her hands are spectacular, so expressive. But anyhow, so I think maybe not on this one, but I think this is going to help me also trim some parts of my drawing. So I'm just applying a few smaller, principles, and already I feel like that's going to give me a bit more of an expressive hand. And again, the goal, which is something, that's the reason why I got the book. It's because it's not literal, and it doesn't try to be literal. And uh, part of it is it's a book when if you don't need to get it, but I'll tell you that some of these books, some of the criticism of books of anatomy is that they're usually, isn't it interesting? I'm going to go here on a tangent. What's interesting is that most of the subjects during the 20th century, figure subjects have been female subjects. And yet, anatomy books are based on muscles and muscle structure of men. So, um, yeah, and the reason why I said this because, especially in this book, you have to understand the context as well. This was written in the late 50s, so the majority of the images there are um, men or male figures, and also they are extremely bulgy, I guess. But there's something about it. Not only I love the drawings, obviously, but there's something about the approach that I really liked in the sense that it's not real, or it's not realistic, rather. It's recognizable, it's figurative, but the artist takes the liberty to exaggerate. And maybe for the purposes of explaining what muscles in motion look like, he does it even further. So, so take that into context, and also take whatever positive aspect you can, because usually the anatomy books are very scientific and boring. So again, so this was the second aspect, the connection between the bones, obviously because the protrusion of the bones makes the skin a bit of like concave in that area. And the third one that I thought was interesting is that he puts a lot of emphasis um, on the padding of the finger. So one, it's the knuckle, which I drew with a circle. Two, it's the connection of the skin between the knuckles, which tends to kind of like create a little wave or belly down, or it's curved. And the third one is the fact that there's an emphasis on, because our hands are designed to grip onto things, and the gripping, this is something that I've never put conscience on it. The gripping aspect our hands need to have like padding in order to be able to grip at something. So consider that when you draw your own hand, if you are doing this, because it could give you an idea of where is the part of the skin closest to the bone, which is on top of the finger, and where is the padding. Sometimes we tend to make fingers like Mickey Mouse fingers, which is fine, because that's where we are at some point. The book is really hilarious. I'm gonna again exaggerate it because on the introduction he writes almost a diatribe against modern art. It's a bit hilarious in the sense, um, yeah, a diatribe saying that he doesn't believe that artists should not be rigorous, about like this, for example, it's a good idea. This padding right here, I totally obliterated, forgotten, or didn't. So I'm gonna actually create a very exaggerated padding. So padding, when I think of padding, it's the opposite of that concave thing. So the padding between the knuckles, and again, I'm exaggerating. And I think this is giving me already a much more expressive hand. I think it's totally working, and I hope you can apply this even with this. I'm just gonna, again, super inspired by this exaggerate approach to the hands because I was trying to be too literal. So sometimes seeing other references can help you. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start trimming this. Since this is my second session, with a second session, I try, not always, but I try to focus on the drawing first. And it's the best entry point, if you ask me. I try not to get distracted with the color or the texture or see it as a stage in which, okay, I did this yesterday or last week. Now I'm going to do the details. I don't approach it this way. Um, I know that I will have a better understanding of the drawing. So therefore, when I approach a second session or a third session, I look at the drawing first. There's something weird right here. Now, I forgot to actually bring this element. So, all right, thinking about knuckles, how about I actually bring this because there's a bone here. This is the beauty, I think, about understanding a bit of anatomy. And look what I'm doing as well. I'm aligning this bone with that bone, this knuckle with that one. So talk about taking advantage of anatomy and the bone structure to actually help us create a much more, I wouldn't say the word better is overrated, a much more satisfying drawing. So definitely sometimes anatomy, a basic understanding can help us tremendously, which I think it does right here, tremendously. Like even this, I could just create maybe an alignment with this. All right, so now that I have the drawing, I'm just gonna, and yeah, so um, before I start, I will read a couple of things that I learned actually from the book that I thought it was interesting. Uh, there's one section about measurement. It's a bit technical, but I thought it was interesting because sometimes we have a tendency of making hands smaller than they are. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because I feel in my head that they're further away from the face and therefore they're not as big, or maybe because there's an insecurity complex that we think that maybe the function of the hands is not that important. So we associate um, less importance with a smaller scale. Who knows what goes in our brains, but we make them smaller. So the section on measurement, it's a bit um, generic and take it with a grain of salt. But essentially, the length of the hand measures. You would kind of like measure the hand, the length extended from your chin to the hairline. So this is how big our hands are, depending on where our hairline is. But I know that I will not remember this next time I paint a figure. But if it's not one bit that it's impossible to remember, and it could be a reference that could help me in the future make hands a little bit bigger than usual. So think of the distance between the chin and the hairline of any portrait you ever do in the future. And if that portrait contains hands, of course, we're talking about something that it's impractical because no one's gonna. do a portrait like this, unless we're being silly and we want to do something. And that's the only way that you could apply this rule that the hand goes from the chin to the hairline. It's totally impractical. But if the hand is sort of like reposing on the knee or on a table, and obviously it's going to have a different axis, a different perspective, a different angle. But think of that measurement, the length between the chin and the hairline, and the length of your hand between the wrist and the tip of the fingers. Another thing that also is quite generic but interesting if you if you draw fingers, is that the middle finger, the third finger from whichever point you want to count, you can point three from the pinky or three from the thumb, which uh, this is something also new for me, and I hope this makes you laugh because I never thought that you could count three from any side of the hand, and you could actually always get to the middle finger because I always associated middle finger with the middle, right? Well, it's called middle for a reason. It's because it's in the middle. It's so funny that we associate the middle finger with the insult, with the, he showed me the middle finger, or, the middle finger this. It's almost like an action. But if you count three from any side, you're always going to get to that finger. So that finger is, generally speaking, thanks, Jen, the longest in our hand. So again, this is impractical in any of these anatomy books because you will never do something like this, or maybe if you want to do a painting of an engagement ring, like, and showing your hand like this, perhaps that could work. But generally speaking, I've never painted a hand in which I had to determine determine so much length. But again, one of those things that I don't know if I'm gonna remember or not in the future. But it's nice to know that all the fingers don't have the same length. And I said the word Mickey Mouse, and that's a really terrible thing because I feel like in the past, maybe some people have used this in a pejorative way to say, your hands look like Mickey Mouse hands. But we're among friends. If you ever hear that again, um, just, yeah, don't take it into account because it could be hurtful. I can imagine saying that to Julio when he was like 10 years old. I would be crushed and devastated. Um, but anyhow, the idea is that all fingers have different lengths, and the longest tends to be, I don't know, you can test it yourself behind the camera, you're safe, and see if that applies to you. Um, and also, you can test yourself and see if that applies to you as well, because that's what I did when I was reading the book. There was a camera on me. That's exactly what I did. I counted one, two, three, and I put my hand on my face. And what else? Um, yeah, I think in this paragraph, this is pretty much it. Yeah, so anyhow, so I just wanted to mention that because I think this was important. So, all right, so I'm gonna also, before I paint, I've been doing some color investigation on my palette, and I changed it yet again. And I'll just go like really as quickly as I can so I can start painting. But I started with chromatic black. So essentially, this is my palette. And my theory or my principle is that I've been reducing the colors down to versions of primaries. Because I believe that when we paint, we tend to desaturate and start from a middle point. We never paint directly from the color out of the tube. So because we do that, this is my version of the primary yellow, the yellow ochre. This is my version of the primary red, which is burnt sienna. So it's like the neutral red, neutral yellow, neutral red. And then for the blue, I've been on a journey, and I think I arrived at a destination. So this was meant to be always. a neutral version of blue. And again, the reason why I'm doing this is because we always start from a midpoint. It's always better to start from a midpoint, and that applies to colors also. So when you start from a midpoint from a color, it's always good to start from the neutral version of the color, and then you can make variations. So that's the principle behind this palette. So we started with chromatic black. It's such a great black. It's not too dark. It's not too tinting or too staining, and it doesn't change the colors too much. But it wasn't cold enough. This wasn't cold enough. Chromatic black was not cold enough to create a neutral version of blue. And then we just switched to Payne's Gray. We know that Payne's Gray, it's cool, and it's a bit colder, so it kind of like worked a little bit, and I was kind of like happy with it. I would have stuck with it because it's such a beloved color, and we like it so much. But then I'm like, okay, so as usual, we will never be satisfied with our palette, by the way, so it's never going to be a point where we're going to say, okay, that's it. I thought, let me try blue black. I tried blue black last week. Blue black, it's like a cool, a little bit, it's dark, but it's a little bit colder than Payne's Gray. So, okay, fine. So I tried it. It works great. But then I'm obsessed. Obviously, it's a bit of OCD, perhaps, with the pigments. The reason why I'm obsessed with pigments is twofold. Number one, we always use pigments, or we try to use pigments that are what's called inorganic and mineral based. Mineral based means that you can find in nature, that it's a pigment that it already exists, and there's not much processing. The opposite of mineral based is synthetic. We know that colors are synthetic, which means that they are made in the lab and using several chemicals. And why do we use mineral based and organic and inorganic? Just because it's closer to nature, and it's less toxic. And also, we kind of like pay reverence to the fact that we can get the source as close to nature as possible. But the second reason also, it's because generally speaking, mineral colors, unless it's a heavy metal, have this really important, whoopsie, really important symbol, the AP, which is an independent test to say that they're not toxic. Even children can use this oil paint. Ah, yeah. So synthetic colors sometimes they could be just like food. It's just it could be a bit more complex or difficult. But the twofold, the second fold is organic versus inorganic. And that's something that I also came to an epiphany this week with the fires. And I'm going to connect this with the fires in a way that hopefully doesn't feel opportunistic or dramatic or cheesy. Inorganic means that you can find in geological formations like iron oxide or stuff like that. Inorganic means like rocks and stones and minerals and metals that are not heavy metals. That's inorganic. It doesn't have a carbon base structure. Organic means that it's carbon based, and anything that it's carbon based means that was alive and at some point carbon based. Just the source of carbon based is an animal source or a plant. It could be a plant source, which is fine. But looking at Payne's Gray, and some of you have heard me say this, that I don't use ivory black because it has a specific pigment. I think it's PB2K, that it comes from bone ash, carbonized or cremated bones. And you could argue that that's nonsense, but sometimes I feel like we do things not so much because it's a matter of life and death. Sometimes we do things because they have a symbolic meaning for us, and it could be the reason why you would buy a car brand and not another, or the reason why you prefer to go to a store and not another. Maybe there's something about it that it will never affect you in regards to your health and your mental health and everything, but there's something symbolic that you want to sort of like pay tribute to just because you want to. It doesn't have to mean that you're gonna talk about it or that you make this the most important thing in your life. But for me, I just it makes me feel a bit icky to use to know that I'm using um, cremated bones. I don't know. There's something really creepy, but it almost feels like with all this that has happened, and people have died and animals have died. I just compounded that symbolism even further if you let me. It just felt even I felt even stronger about not using a pigment that at some point was alive. It just felt like, you know what? No, this, sometimes you get like some turning points and then you're like, okay, so I don't know what analogy I would bring up, but maybe there's a food that hurts you one day, or maybe there's a food that is associated with something, and you're like, no, and then there's a moment where like, now I realize why I'm not using it. Well, to me, this was one of those moments, and I feel almost embarrassed to say this just because people have lost lives and homes, and I'm sort of like philosophizing about this. But the news is that ivory black is not the only color that has carbonized bones. It turns out that any Payne's gray that it's in the market, and I went to the art store, I went online, has the same pigment. And not only that, but blue black also has that pigment. So this dark uh, indigo also has that pigment. So I thought it was only ivory black, but I found four blacks or four versions that contain that pigment. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna phase it out. And then I found Prussian blue, and that's what I'm gonna be using today, Prussian blue. Prussian blue is a blue that we used, and it's a dark blue. It feels very neutral, and it's both inorganic, which means it doesn't come from animal source, and mineral based. It's actually found extracting a compound from earth. So to me, that was important, and it also there's only one pigment for it because I sometimes some manufacturers they do their kind of like combinations and they mix a lot of pigments. And by pigments, you'll realize that in the back of the tube, if the manufacturer decides to do it, you'll see the list of pigments. And this is like a global um, code. Everyone in the world will know that the pigment has a certain origin and a certain composition. So it's like the table of the chemical symbols. There's a long list of pigments, and pigments in the raw form, they're used for dyeing, they're used for acrylic, for watercolor, for oil. This is not just for oil. It's the core pigment applies to any form of color. I'm not sure if like food coloring has that as well, but an industrial coloring of any kind, when you color something, car paint, anything, it has those codes. So the closest to one single code you get, I feel like the more pure the more basic the color is. You're gonna find colors that have three or four codes in the back, and that means that color, that manufacturer has the copyright of that color, and no one else can probably do that color. But when it comes down to single codes, you know that color could be purchased from Utrecht, from Gamblin, from uh, uh, Newton. I always forget the first word, or from the one uh, Michael Hardy, whatever, Rembrandt. Um, these three colors have a single pigment, a single base pigment. And there's something about that that makes it like really uh, a baseline that I feel it's not pure, but principle base. All right. So I'm excited to use Prussian blue because I think that's going to make gorgeous greens, by the way, which with the Payne's Gray, I love the greens that I got from the Payne's Gray, but I think this is going to be a total game changer. Yeah, in fact, I I'm a little bit afraid because I like things super muted, but I'm really excited. Even turquoisey colors, Prussian blue, it has like a greenish cast. This is a beautiful turquoise. So maybe that's another revelation. How can you make turquoise, Prussian blue, yellow ochre, and a little bit of white, and it creates a beautiful turquoise, which is one of the hardest colors to make, right? So I think um, this is pretty. I think this is pretty nice. So I'm excited to create this range or to use this range in landscapes. And yeah, so I am going to go ahead and maybe what I'll do is with some burnt sienna. Uh, the only thing about Prussian blue that I need to be extremely careful is that the staining power. Um, it's really strong. So I just have to. And by the way, I have no doubt this is the first time that I'm using this, but I'm going to use a different brush. But not that it matters. Lighter first always makes the lighter color first, darker later. But you can make a black, gorgeous black um, with these two colors. A really beautiful black. And then you can see um, mixing this, you can create a beautiful range of grays. But notice that this gray is very cold. So that's why I'll need to be careful to mix um, the Prussian blue into the mixes. But this is beautiful. This is a great gray. Um, yeah, so notice what I did was add more burnt sienna uh, to the mix in order to make it less. Burnt sienna and Prussian blue are opposite in temperature, so it could give you a good way to balance grays. And maybe I don't need neutral grays moving forward. Maybe it's just gonna be just wanna it's gonna be a weird gray. I don't know, but to be continued. I don't know how long this is gonna last. Maybe I'll go back to chromatic black. Chromatic black has two pigments, and it's inorganic and it's non-synthetic, which to me are preferable. Am I gonna never use Payne's Gray? No. Am I gonna never use like indigo? No. I'm not saying that I'm completely against, and I will never sort of like judge anyone, obviously. But the things I kind of like learn. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, oops, I'm going back to this, and since I did the drawing, I'm just gonna go back, and I'm not gonna go by the photograph as much. And I embrace this is gonna be my Prussian blue period. Let's put it this way, because everything's gonna be a bit colder. I'm gonna have to learn. I don't recommend this limited palette um, to beginners. None of us are beginners, but uh, it's not the palette that I would recommend because it's hard. to create colors from only three. Okay, so this is good. And then I'm just gonna go to this and then trim it. And I think, again, it's just like my entry point is always the drawing. I'm gonna trim this, but this, I need to be careful. There is a shadow. So I'm gonna put the Prussian blue to task right now and see what kind of purple I can create. Um, or purplish I can create. Okay, so it's not super purple, but it's something. And I'm just gonna add it. It's like a really greenish cast. Maybe a little bit more pressure. This is gonna be interesting. Okay, a little bit like this, and this is shadow. And then what I'm gonna do is, now that I have this, I feel like I'm gonna create a flesh tone. I forgot how I did it. A flesh tone. Um, yeah, a flesh tone like this. Okay, good. And I'm going to um, exaggerate this area right here. And I'm going to exaggerate this one right here, especially this one and this one right here. I just want to go a little bit out of the norm. Okay. And then I will create some, yeah, some pinky areas and pink based, and maybe. So I'm trying to kind of like apply the tones and remove the circles that I made. Okay, for now. And then I'll just go back and redo that. Yeah, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. I'm just gonna blurry this edge work. Um, yeah. All right. Well, definitely this is a different type of hand, but I'm into it. Even the color palette is. So I'm removing the charcoal a bit. Oh, and then perhaps I should also bring some of that. The padding, I think that was something really important that I got from the bits of info that I want to retain with my brain. I get lost when there are too many instructions. I like to read them and understand, but I also like to be realistic, and I know that my brain is not going to remember that next time I paint. So I just get the basic premise. I get the premise that I could apply the most. Something simple, something that feels more universal. I'm totally bringing the padding also here. And I'm not afraid to see where this can lead me. But yeah, yeah, it's just definitely, I think that's much more interesting than it was before. I try also not to make conforming brushstrokes too much. So that's why I broke this a bit with a bit of blending because it was too sharp. And when it gets too sharp, then anything that feels too sharp is an invitation for the viewer to concentrate on that edge. So it's self-defeating um, as a painter to create edges that are too sharp because what you think you're making things more exact when in fact what you're doing is you're bringing attention to that edge and the viewer is going to spend more time analyzing it. So know that the sharpness of the edge is like the focusing a lens on a camera. When you bring focus, you bring attention. That's an example of a universal principle that you could use in any of your future paintings. When you bring focus, you bring attention. Use however you want it, but know that it's equally positive and it could be also challenging. It's positive because then you can play with it with things that are not focused and things that are focused to direct the attention of the viewer the way you want it. But if you think that a painting is going to be better if everything is sharp, it's going to be too overwhelming for a viewer. It's going to be flattening because there's no sense of perspective. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of things that happen. Okay, I'm just going to concentrate on the background. And actually, I'm glad with this pale color. So, and I'm gonna also bring this protrudes a bit too much. I mean, I get the bone structure, but maybe I need to shape up a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit better. I'm glad that I trimmed the hand so heavily on this edge. It was a little bit it expanded too much. Definitely I am much happier about this, much happier. Okay, so things that now I can go back and forth, like for example, on the fingers, the bottom, the thumb actually can be raised a bit further. I actually love the color situation, but I think now I can concentrate more on the drawing. Always the drawing leads everything, not the color. The drawing leads. Okay, good. Yeah, I think that's good. And then maybe I'll just bring some shaded area. I'm using like a medium brush and oh yeah, here. And that's totally um, done. But I need to bring more reds. I feel like there needs to be more uh, warmth. I'm not even, yeah, this is the thing about a limited palette, because obviously I would benefit here if I would bring an actual red. What's the purple? Was it quinacridone purple, quinacridone red that it was so good for skin tone. This would be a good time to bring it. But um, the nice thing about um, here, a little bit darker. I'm gonna remove the charcoal from the photograph and I can concentrate a bit more. Okay, so here. I have like a darkened area, so my paintings are gonna look so different color-wise. Okay, this knuckle needs to be raised a bit. It looks a bit weird, but weird is good. Weird can be good. Don't spend too much time in the same area. I'm gonna blur this a bit. It's a shadow, so I think. And then I'm gonna work on the background a lot. I'm resisting this area, and I know that before I do any more details here, because I'm getting really comfortable with this part right here. I'm avoiding this. So, and I'm avoiding this because it's too big. So I'm gonna go to these two areas, but now I just want to play with the background a little bit. Yeah, and I'm just like scratching it. There's something cool about seeing the brushstroke a bit. And I need to tell myself that I'm not following the same lines as the photograph because I already made these exaggerated bones, and the photograph doesn't have the bones, the bony area. And so I should be okay with it. Um, yeah, I'm just gonna create this and then blend it, blend the edge a bit. So it looks like a shadow. Yeah, I think that's gonna help. Definitely is gonna help. I'm gonna bring some white. Well, it's definitely this palette's gonna be much more colorful than with Payne's Gray. I'm gonna need some time to get adjusted for sure. It's the first time I'm using Prussian blue, by the way, which is a beautiful blue. And I was so disappointed with the indigo blue because I thought the indigo, would have like indigo pigment, but the indigo pigment that I saw in different brands, it's ivory black and ultramarine, blue ultramarine. So, not ultramarine. What's the blue? Is it ultramarine? Yeah. Yeah, it's ultramarine. So that makes indigo. There's no special pigment that the oil companies use for indigo. It's just black and blue. Um, yeah, so I thought indigo blue had like, I don't know, some sort of like pigment or maybe the dye um, has that, but not the pigment. Yeah, I think that's good. I know that I'm gonna go back there again, and I am just gonna bring a bit more color here in the back. The background, a second layer in the background will always build and create more opacity. So I'm not concerned right now about with whatever distinction. So right now, I'm not concerned at all about the fact that this is a bit more pearly and this is a little bit warmer. So it's okay because I'll be able to unify maybe later. But the purpose of a second session, it's sort of like intensify or polish, redraw, but it doesn't have like the idea is not that that's gonna solve everything. Okay, this is good. Actually, I'm gonna pull back. Sorry, this moves a lot, but I'm really happy. I'm really happy. The shadow is taking shape. It's a bit different from this. It looks a bit weird here, but I'm gonna keep this weirdness, and I know that I'm gonna have to work on the padding, and that's a term that I'm glad I came across. The padding of the fingers because we've never used it. We always talked about the palm, which is really important, and the wrist, the palm and the wrist, because it's where we make the most um, habits. I'm not going to call mistakes or anything. We 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 unify the forearm, the wrist, and the palm all together. It just becomes all the same thing. And then we just like stick some fingers at the end. But that's not how it works. There's a distinction between the wrist, the palm, and the fingers. And I think that's where we kind of like stopped when we painted hands or we talked about hands. We never talked. We did talked about knuckles, but we never talked about um, the padding of the fingers. Which I think it's okay. So this looks much more complete and contextualized and with a better perspective. I think this needs to have more white, which I'm gonna bring some white, but I also need to be aware that with white, you want to make something lighter. It's just gonna take uh, a couple of things. Either remove everything or let it sit for next time. I love the contrast because obviously I'm analyzing this. The light direction comes from this source, okay? And it's creating shadow right here. But at the same time, what creates is the fact that the background here continues behind the hands. There's no shadow. So I would benefit tremendously, tremendously if I would make this as lighter as possible compared to this. Because that would mean that I would lift the fingers or the knuckles away from the background. I'm going to do it just briefly because it's already wet. And with the knuckles and everything, I made a bit of a mess. And I know that I need another session there. But I'll just, for the purposes of how effective working on the background can be, I'll just do it slightly to just give you the effect of how something so simple as to lighten the background on one end can transform. I mean, it's just like I think it's totally working. It can transform the perspective, and I'm not even working on the hand right now. It's just I'm doing even this area needs to be much lighter. It's okay that this is a bit shaded, but this, and I'm gonna make it lighter next time. So, because obviously it doesn't get like super light because the paint it's getting mixed with the color, the white colors underneath. But that's another, even the charcoal. One side doesn't have a shadow at all. The other one does. Totally. Absolutely. Maybe this needs to be a bit sharper actually now that I notice, but I'm gonna avoid conforming brushes. I'm gonna avoid conforming brush strokes. I'm gonna make the brush strokes stop because I think that's gonna help as well. If I make conforming brush strokes, yeah, huge difference if you ask me. Wow, that looks really nice. All right. So I'm gonna let's do a 15 more minutes because I know that we have like more people. Yay, we have more people. So, oh, I thought Lois was here. Okay, so I'll just maybe 15 more minutes and then we can just exchange images and stuff like that. Um, okay, so here's going to be my goal, and I think it's important to I think this is helpful because hopefully you'll be able to see how my painting process also my thinking process looks like when I paint because this is as important as any technique or any revelation. Um, I said that these two areas I'm avoiding them, and I know I'm avoiding them, and I'm putting excuses to not paint them. And so I'm going to try to do something. I have no idea with this two, and then I'm going to stop. So part of the reason it's because the fingers right here, they feel like super thick, and I think I just did not quite get that. So let's see, what can we do? I am just going to maybe bring more padding. I'm applying, the charcoal needs to stick out more. Okay, so first of all, charcoal. I'm gonna bring it, look at this gorgeous black. So colorful. I'm gonna bring the charcoal in a bit further. It's like green. I don't know. Okay, so, and then I'm just gonna create the padding and exaggerate it even more. Okay, and I'm gonna do the same thing here. This padding, this is the joint, and this is the padding right here. So that's what's gonna happen. And then, like, darker shadow and darker shadow, and definitely darker shadow right here. And then I'm just gonna do lighter skin tone. Lighter skin tone. Yeah, for sure. Lighter here and here. I'm gonna stop, and a bit darker. Hmm. And lighter here. All right, this is gonna work out, but not yet. I just need a second coat, which I did. And then I'll go back in. I'm gonna leave it here. I know that it needs a lot. I know that it needs a lot, but I'm gonna leave it here. Definitely the palette compared to last week, because I'm painting a little bit more than last week. It's expanding. And the Prussian blue is definitely doing a lot more. It's more dynamic. It's more um, less neutral. It's more present. But I'm gonna work with it. I'm gonna let it guide me. Yeah, I'm just bringing a bit of highlights. Everything works um, synergetically. Yeah, I think that's a good word for it. Okay, so I'm gonna leave this here. There's definitely a bit of a darker. I'm losing the padding again. The padding. I love that we're working on that specific. It's okay. And then I clean my brush, and I'm just gonna blend it a bit. So clean the brush and blend. So there's no paint on my brush. And here we go. I think that's good. I'm not gonna do the nail yet, but all right, it's gonna work. But for now, uh, this is also a big padding right here. All right, and then I'm just gonna work on this. So I'm just gonna bring some skin tone and block it out because I need opacity before I start polishing it. So that's gonna be my strategy. A bit of burnt sienna, a bit of yellow ochre, because I think this has a bit of yellow ochre, yeah. The thing about larger surfaces, I think 16 by 20, the challenge is that we have to make more paint. I realize we have to make more paint. This is much darker right here, so I'm just gonna keep from the bone. I should use a bigger brush, and I'm not. I don't know why, but I should use a bigger brush. I'm thinning the paint, and I shouldn't do that to make it like last longer.
Jules, what size brush have you been using through this?
Number four,
Okay.
number four, and it's yeah, too small, but it's okay. I should use at least like 12 for this specifically. It's for this stage, at least for this stage, because later when I apply more details, then I need a smaller brush. But it's okay. It's not bad. I'd rather sort of like do it like this. Yeah, I actually see. I think these two things have worked synergetically. What am I doing right now? I'm blending and smudging. I think that works because I have layers already underneath, and again, I don't have to block them. Oh, so much more interesting. So much more interesting. So I'm getting around the perimeter of that area and just blending it. I need to get this a bit warmer. I think what the Prussian blue is going to do is going to demand more um, color to be balanced. Definitely, it's going to be a much more dynamic, uh, it's going to require a much more dynamic way of painting. I don't know. I don't know. But I feel also with the Prussian blue, I feel I can create a wider range of colors. Like no one would know that I'm using only four colors um, at all. You know, I could create really colorful paintings with vibrant greens and beautiful neutrals. I'll just need a bit of transition time and adjustment. I'm just gonna create a bit of highlights, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there. This reminds me when I painted the paintings of the neck, and those were large paintings or larger than usual, and with a lot of skin surface. And I had to do a lot of layers. Um, so I think for skin, which makes sense, it's just gonna require it's gonna require more layering. Maybe that's one of the also lessons. Skin takes more layers in oil. Yeah, I'm okay. This is like what I intended to achieve, and I see the beginnings of the illusion that there is some hollowness right here. It's just like a little illusion, but it's not quite there. But it's I think it's a bit better, and definitely I think I was able to. Let me see if I can. I was able to here make a better sense. of the fingers inside. So they don't look too uh, disproportionate compared to these fingers right here. I think it looks great. Well, I'm gonna remove this border a little bit, but I'm curious, because with what I'm gonna try to do is see if I can make a raw umber with this color. Because one of the things with chromatic black, yes, I can. That it was really easy. It was really easy to make raw umber, but it's much harder with this. It's much harder. I realize I can, but it's much harder. Yeah, no, it's much harder. It's not really raw umber. Well, yeah, it could be raw umber. It's a different, yeah, it is raw umber. Totally. I can. Okay, so then I'm safe. Um, okay, so yeah, what I'm gonna do is I want to lighten up a bit this area right here because it feels like it's a line. This is when our observation kicks in, and then we start kind of like polishing, yeah, some things. So definitely this would be, and then when our detail-oriented decision making kicks in, when we have something, and this is a good example of what I would do or how I would approach a second a second phase or a second. It's by, if you notice, I worked on structure, I worked on drawing, I infused an idea about this first. I didn't go straight to details or fold, and the painting I think inarguably improved without even getting into the details of variations of um, color. It did improve. So always approach things from the perspective of drawing and construction and edge and form, and then play with color. Oh, I think it's great. I'm actually okay. So then what? I am gonna blend a little bit, but I think what I'm gonna do just a couple more minutes, and then I'm gonna turn this off, and then we can just do some feedback. Um, yeah, yeah. So now, I mean, here, this is the direction that I could take right now, because the paint, I need to play with this. It looks a bit off, but the paint is now wet. So because the paint's wet, this layer allows me to create so much blending. And this would be a good opportunity to actually work on this a little bit longer. Um, but at the same time, I think I like the expressiveness of the layer that I achieved. So maybe what I'll do, I'm gonna let it sit and then work on it uh, another time, definitely another time. I need to kind of like close these gaps right here. There's a shadow on the charcoal. So there's a lot that need to be done, but my palette today looks much more developed. Um, and yeah, I just need to be careful about the Prussian blue taking over because notice that it's already creating so much coolness. It's not so much about the tinting. It's just the coolness that I need to be extra careful. But it could just create spectacular effects. All right. Well, I'm just going to close. I'm going to stop the recording for now.